An 18-month restoration of the Robert Gould Shaw and the 54th Massachusetts Regiment Memorial is complete, and earlier this month, a ceremony to rededicate the bronze bas-relief was held on Beacon Street. It pays tribute to the all-black volunteer 54th Massachusetts Regiment, as well as Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, who fought in the Civil War. There was a reenactment of soldiers marching up Beacon Street and a wreath laying in front of the sculpture.
It's just a kind of a reminder of where we've come from and how many steps that we have taken. So it's kind of exciting to see, and as a descendant of a 54th Regimental participant, it's pretty exciting.
The memorial was originally unveiled 125 years ago. It underwent a $3 million renovation. Improvements include new waterproofing, a new concrete foundation, and a new frame meant to stabilize the sculpture. Joining me now is Lamerche Frazier. She's Director of Education and Interpretation at the Museum of African American History on Boston and Nantucket. The museum was one of the partners involved in the renewal of the memorial. Lamerche, it was a beautiful day. That rededication was fabulous, wasn't it?
It was absolutely splendid.
The Shaw Memorial remains one of sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens's most celebrated masterpieces and is considered by some to be America's greatest public monument. Who commissioned it and why?
Well, the first man to bring it up at the end of the Battle of Fort Wagner in 1863 was a Black man, a caterer here in Boston, who said, Joshua Bowden Smith was his name, we need a monument. And so he and Charles Sumner agreed that they should wait until the end of the war to have it. So it is the Black community that initiates this monument. And it is then a committee that hires St. Gaudens, who presents himself and not a model at the Union Club on Park Street, across from where the monument would rest. He thinks it is a 2-year experience. It is to become a 14-year experience because his first model was rejected as the single man on the horse and then had to include the men of the regiment.
Now, the monument, as you said, depicts Colonel Robert Gould Shaw of Boston, the son of staunch abolitionists and his men, marching past the Massachusetts State House on their way to South Carolina in 1863. So why was that moment in history depicted?
Well, that moment becomes a moment where even people like Martin Luther King and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow have talked about the right of the soldiers who are most affected to fight in this war. And it is a celebration by 1,000 revelers on Beacon Street when they march May the 28th, 1863, up that hill to go on to Fort Wagner. Their hands are shook by Frederick Douglass. And it is in a moment of I can participate in what is affecting me most.
Frederick Douglass was there on the reviewing stand as the regiment marched up Beacon Street, and Douglass had worked tirelessly to convince President Lincoln to allow recruitment of African Americans into the Army. And Douglass had a personal connection to the 54th. Tell us about that.
Yes, his two sons, Charles and Lewis, were a part of the 54th Regiment as recruits. And he was very proud of the fact that they would go and fight. Even though things were not perfect and there were not Black officers allowed, he said, this is our moment. We have to do this. It is in our hands to take it and take this moment. We are yet to learn that this is the right time. The right itself is called into question, and that the men to assert it are the men to whom the right has been denied.
Wow, wow. That's a very, very powerful quote. In Charleston, the men of the 54th were literally outgunned and outnumbered. 281 of the 600 soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. And this loss was still very empowering, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. They didn't win the war, the battle, but they won the war.
How is it that they didn't win the battle, but they won the war? Which war did they win?
The Civil War. And it's the idea that they participated and weakened the Confederate forces was to be embraced, and that they added to what were the efforts of the colored troops, as they were called then, that were on the that were in the Union forces to win this war.
And in fact,
So-
I guess that's the war I was talking about, that the black soldiers won the war of respectability.
Yes, with respect to freedom and liberty, they were charged, and they were not going to be denied. And with that, we see the fervor of what becomes the fall of the Confederate capital in Richmond, Virginia, in 1865, April 2nd. That it is colored troops who usher in that demise of the capital.
So, Lamurchi, as we go through this celebratory Juneteenth weekend, tell us, is there any connection to the story of the Shaw Memorial to Juneteenth?
Yes, the force, as we were just saying about the colored troops and their role in the Civil War, was critical. And what they offered was the opportunity to strike the blow. When I brought up that moment of 1865, April 2nd, when Richmond falls, it is this moment that there has already been fleeing of General Davis and others who are trying to protect the Confederacy, but they know they're done. And so by April the 3rd, there is a statement that's made that among the troops entering the city were the African-American soldiers of the United States colored troops, that they often respond to having been reminded by the city's enslaved people in the jails, singing "Slavery chains done broke at this time." And so their attachment to this is that Murrah Pendleton, who was the governor of Texas at the time, knew that there might be these black troops that would escort him and his Confederate troops out of the Confederate territories. And so the black troops, that threat to him, said, I have to flee to Mexico. And so he takes his troops to Mexico, as did other Confederates. So the position of black soldiers was one of a fierce threat to be dismantled by black people was going to cause them so much embarrassment.
Lamurchi, we have about 1 minute left. Is there a myth or misunderstanding about Juneteenth that you think we should know about?
Yes, I do. I think that if we read General Order Number 3, we have the ability to understand that as it is read to the enslaved people who have already been aware of the Emancipation Proclamation, that all slaves are free is the joyous moment. Yes. But then there are phrases that follow that say, you shall go to your homes quietly. You shall not be idle. You cannot gather at military posts, that cite those conditions that then are manifested in Reconstruction as we fight our way to freedom.
So black folks did know about the emancipation. They just weren't in a position to emancipate themselves at that moment. Okay.
Yes.
Very good.
And that order did not give us the right to be protected by the military. And so, this says to me, celebrate yet acknowledge what it really is.
All right, Lamurchi Frazier from the Museum of African American History, thank you so much for being here today. And thanks to all of you for watching. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at CityLine 5. And you can follow me on Twitter at Karen Holmes Ward. Have a great afternoon.